I just listened to a Mel Robbins podcast episode about not quitting. And I felt so called out about wanting to quit when things get hard. And at the same time, she was also teaching me how to be a better content creator. So thanks, Mel. How does she do it? How does she call you out, build you up, and make you want to be better all at the same time? That's what we're exploring in this episode of the Brassy Broadcast. Hello, friends. I'm Jen Eads, the head broad in charge. We are going to have some fun in this episode, and you are going to be inspired to start finding inspiration in the work of other creators that you love, whose work just lights you up. This can be podcasts, YouTube videos, music, books, blog posts, whatever, social media posts. Are you using that work as a role model or influence for your own creative work? What can you learn from the creators that you love and add into the mix of your own projects? Are you taking the time to be intentional and really pay attention to the work of these other creators that you love to consume, or are you just mindlessly consuming their work? Junior high and high school me spent countless hours trying to learn some of my favorite guitar solos and parts note for note for some of my favorite songs. And it wasn't like I could go to YouTube in the 80s and watch some 14-year-old teach me how to shred the guitar solo from Crazy Train. It was a struggle then, but I had the drive and the patience to sit there and learn. Every guitar riff that I learned from Stevie Ray Vaughan and Nancy Wilson and Randy Rhoads found its way into my playing and still influences my guitar playing to this day. Musicians study other musicians. We learn their licks and then we incorporate them into our own playing. We immerse ourselves in the songs of other songwriters as we learn how to play them. This is how we learn to write songs. This is how we improve our own playing. We study and we analyze our favorites, and then we incorporate what we've learned into our own work. Now, I'm not saying go out and copy your favorite podcaster or YouTuber word for word. I'm not encouraging plagiarism or theft of intellectual property here. I'm saying listen critically, break it down, start taking notes. What resonates with you? What do they do really well that you wish you could do better? How are they showing up? What kind of stories are they telling? How are they structuring their podcast episodes or their YouTube videos? How are they hooking you and getting you to press play? What do they do that keeps you listening through the entire episode and hanging on the edge of your seat? How do they keep you coming back? In this episode, I'm going to share what I've learned from studying one of my favorite podcasters. Here we go. Let's talk about Mel Robbins. I've read her books. I loved listening to her when she was a guest on other podcasts, so I was so excited when I heard that she finally started her own show. So here's a few things that I've learned from Mel Robbins that I want to incorporate into my own content creation. So first, let's talk about who is Mel Robbins and what is it about her that resonates with millions of subscribers on her YouTube channel. She's an author, she's a podcaster, she's got like billions of views on her YouTube channel, but that's not why I actually listen to her. She's a Gen Xer like me. So that immediately creates a connection for us. We're close to the same age and probably have a lot of the same shared life and cultural experiences. She even refers to herself as your friend Mel Robbins. And who doesn't want another friend? And the thing is, she actually sounds like she would be your friend. She makes me think of that person that if you were walking lost around the school cafeteria, she would actually invite you to come sit at her table. That's the kind of vibe that I get from her. And she's definitely the kind of person that my friends and I would invite to come hang out around the fire pit with us. So Mel, if you ever hear this, consider yourself invited. What resonates with me most is that she does not pretend to sound like she's got life all figured out. But I do feel like she's a few steps ahead of me. So I'm definitely going to listen to her. She's kind of like that cool high school senior that is watching out for your sorry little freshman ass. That's how I view Mel Robbins. She's a fabulous storyteller and no BS and she doesn't pretend to be anything that she's not, which reminds me a lot of another one of my favorite storytellers, Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton can make you laugh and cry in the same story. So make sure she's on your list of folks to study if she's not on there already. Mel also isn't afraid to drop an F-bomb. Now, this makes her not for everyone, but it tells me wholeheartedly that she is my people. In the past, I've struggled to get clear on my why. Why do I show up and feel the need to create this work? What's the purpose of it? Not Mel Robbins. She is crystal clear on her mission and her purpose. She wants to help you live a better life, and by God, she's going to give you the tools to do it. Are you crystal clear on your why? If not, I would start there. Why do you want to start a podcast or a YouTube channel or a blog? Get that figured out first. Your why is your North Star, and that will guide all of your decision making. When someone watches one of your videos or listens to one of your podcast episodes, are they clear on what your why is? Is it that little thread that's running through all of your work that kind of pulls it all together? And I'm not talking about finding your niche here. This is bigger. I'm talking about the purpose behind everything that you create and put out into the world. Now let's talk about the how. This is where it gets super fun for me because now we get to start reverse engineering some things. How is she building her brand and creating all of this content? I mean, she's got podcasts and YouTube videos and books and social media posts. Geez, Mel, she's like the Roy Kent of content creation. I mean, she's here, she's there, she's well, if you know, you know. If you don't know, then start watching Ted Lasso. You won't regret it. No matter the medium, Mel is always consistent with her why and her goal of helping us live a better life and giving us the tools to do it. You see this thread through all of her work, and it doesn't matter what topic she's talking about or who she's interviewing, that thread is always there, tying everything together. Let's start with kind of the big overview of just even looking at her branding. There's usually a splash of yellow somewhere. She's always wearing those black glasses. She's even incorporated the glasses into her logo, which I love. And she's just always Mel Robbins in every video I've ever seen or every podcast I've ever listened to. She shows up consistently as herself. And let's just talk about consistency. That has been one of my biggest struggles as a podcaster and video creator. She's showing up and intentionally creating with the purpose that she is going to repurpose a lot of this content across multiple channels. So you're going to see it on YouTube. You're going to hear it in the podcast. You're going to see little clips on social media. She's going to take something that she talked about in the podcast and talk about it on Instagram. She and her team are getting the most they can out of every single piece of content. And I like how she mixes it up on Instagram. It's not always the same old thing. It's not always, here's a clip from the podcast and here's my latest podcast episode. Oh no, sometimes we get text posts and sometimes we get clips of her just out walking or talking to us from a room in her house. I like that it's not always the same thing. And I really appreciate that her social media posts have text or captions because I'm not always scrolling with the sound turned up. If you aren't using captions on your post, start. And I know you're probably sitting there thinking, hey, Jen, I don't have a whole team to do all of this stuff for me. Yeah, I don't either. I get it. It feels so overwhelming at times. I always have the best intentions of promoting my latest podcast episode or my YouTube video, and it doesn't always happen. That's why it's even more important to be really intentional with what you're creating and thinking about how you can chop it up and share it in multiple places so that you can reach the most people and get the most out of it. You're investing a lot of time in this. Get something out of it. I use tools like Riverside.fm and Descript. They make it easier for solo creators to record and repurpose that content. I have links to both of those in the description. When you start planning your content, think about how you can most easily repurpose it. Even if you don't have time to repurpose a lot of it now, you are still building a content library. It's always going to be there for you, and you can go back to it. So make sure that you're saving your recordings with descriptive names that tell you exactly what they are. And then make sure that you are backing those recordings up, saving them in the cloud somewhere, saving them on multiple hard drives so that you don't ever lose them. Now let's go in and actually break down a Mel Robbins podcast episode. This episode is about 48 minutes long, and it is a masterclass, especially if you are using your podcast or videos for any kind of coaching or consulting business. I'll have a link to this episode in the podcast show notes and the video description because I really want you to listen to this episode, not just for all the cool things that she does technically that make it a great podcast episode, but for the message, because I feel like we've all been there and wanted to throw in the towel at some point when things got hard. And this will help you think about it. So thank you, Mel Robbins, for the ass kicking that I needed on a Saturday morning when I listened to this episode. So let's start with the episode title, which I love. And the episode title is, Feel Like Giving Up? Before you say F it, listen to this. I'm already hooked. The title is written to make me want to press play. This is a woman that knows her audience, and this title is written for them. And you might be thinking, but Jen, shouldn't we be including keywords for SEO so that we pop up in searches? And I'm going to say, it depends. What is the purpose of your show? What is the purpose of this individual episode? Do you already have a built-in audience? Are you going for discoverability, or are you writing this for the audience that you already have? Now, this episode is broken down into 3 segments. Do you ever think about your podcast episode in segments? It's really helpful. Even if you just think about it as the beginning, the middle, and the end. How does it flow? And how do you keep your listener moving through all of those segments? I'm going to share some highlights with you that really jumped out to me as a podcast producer because I geek out on this stuff. And I love seeing it out in the wild and learning things that I can then come back and share with you in real time. Before we get too far into this, I want to say that her podcast sounds good, really good and professional. The sound quality is fantastic. And I can't tell you how many podcasts that they get me to press play and I'm all excited. And then I start the episode and it sounds like they're in a freaking tin can. I'm not going to listen to that. There are so many other options that I can tell that the host actually cares how they sound. And that's important to me. Maybe I'm a little bit of a podcast snob. I don't know, but it's not that hard to sound good, or at least to not sound bad. At a minimum, all you have to do is open up your junk drawer, pull out those old Apple earbuds, the kind with the wire, and they've got a built-in microphone, and use those. That's going to make you sound so much better. When you don't sound good, it tells me that you didn't care enough about what you're saying to sound better. And if you don't care, I'm sure not going to care. Now, this episode starts with a host read ad about Orange Theory. I love a good host read ad. And Mel can tie Orange Theory back into her purpose and her why about helping us live better lives. So it's totally in alignment with her and her brand. It just makes sense that they would advertise on this podcast. And then she gets right into the episode and what this episode is about and why we should listen. And there's no 60-second canned intro that sounds super cheesy that's listing off all her bona fides. She doesn't need it. But she does take the time to welcome new listeners and share a little bit. Now let's talk about the content of this episode. She is sharing something that she's struggling with in real time. Oh, what? She's a famous author, podcaster, YouTuber, speaker, whatever, and she doesn't have it all together? That's relatable. Tell me more. And this is exactly the feeling that you want to create for your listeners when you're introducing the topic or your guest during your intro. You want them to lean in and say, tell me more. And if you can make your listener feel like they aren't alone in their own struggle, then bonus points for you. And then she does this. This is brilliant. If you want to increase downloads from your back catalog of episodes, check this out. she mentions that she's working on a podcast series. So she's created episodes that stand alone, but then they all work together as part of this bigger series. Now, how many listeners do you think are going to go back and download those other episodes from the series? Because they want to hear it all. And then she sets the hook and immediately just pulls us into a story by saying, I had planned on, but what happened was, there's the hook for the story and the episode, and we are off to the races. Oh, but this isn't about Mel and her struggle. Oh, no, because she also has a listener going through their own effort moment of struggle right now. So she brings in a listener question. And even better, she actually gets that listener on a call and coaches her through this struggle. How do you build community and engagement with your listeners? Ask them to submit questions and then answer them. Engage with your audience as real people. So we hear the question, and then she goes into the commercial break. Got to get that ad revenue, baby. But she leaves us wondering, how's Mel going to answer this question? So we're going to come back after the ads and hear how she answers it. And that's our transition from segment 1 into segment 2. So in segment 2, she starts by bringing the listener on the podcast and starts coaching her through this struggle. And she's empathetic and no BS as she walks this lady through it. And then she gives her something actionable that she wants her to do. And this segment of them talking is probably about 14 to 15 minutes long. And guess what? Then we head into the break. And as we head into this break, she tells us what's going to happen next when we come back. Are we going to stick around and find out? You know it. So in the third segment, she asks the guests, what can I count on you for? That creates some tension and some friction and some drama. And Mel is still super encouraging at this point, but she's asking for some accountability. At one point during the conversation, the woman says something about how she's feeling. And Mel says, say more about that. What do you mean? Listen for opportunities to ask this question of your guest. It's such a powerful question because it gives us the opportunity to get below all of the surface level stuff. And below the surface is where the magic happens. Say more about that. What do you mean? And then near the end of the episode, which is probably about the last 10 minutes or so, she recaps and connects the dots for us like a good host. And she also says this, you need to listen all the way to the end. Man, I would love to see what her episode retention rates are. I'm sure they are just through the roof. Are your listeners listening all the way through the episode? Do you know where they start to drop off? Do you know where to find this information for your episodes? It's okay if you don't. A lot of people don't even look at it. If you want to know where to find it, send me a DM on Instagram at BrassyBroadJen. I'll be happy to show you where to get it. So she starts to wrap it up at this point, tells us that she loves us, and then drops a little teaser that she'll be back in a couple of days to help us live a better life with science-backed habits. Am I going to come back in a couple of days? Probably. Am I going to make sure that I'm subscribed to the podcast so that I can hear the episode when it comes back? Yep, sure am. And then the music starts and she's wrapping it up. No canned outro. She's just talking, still just talking to us. And because it's not a canned outro, we're still paying attention because we don't want to miss anything. And then the music stops and we hear, oh, and she gives us the legal disclaimer. And that's it. This episode included all 4 things that I encourage my clients to put in their own episodes, and that is feeling, facts, fun, and friction. I learned about the importance of including those first 3 elements, the feeling, facts, and fun, in an episode that I listened to with Chris Doe and Brendan Kane. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes and description. If you are creating any kind of content, whether you're trying to make a viral video or a podcast or YouTube video, I can't recommend this episode enough. And then that 4th element of friction If you read anything or watch any videos about storytelling, you always got to have friction in there, some kind of drama, some kind of tension, some kind of stakes. That's what is going to keep your listener engaged. And that's it for the actual episode breakdown. Now, let's talk about the podcast show notes and YouTube description. But first, a podcast confession from me. I hate writing show notes. I don't know why. Probably because I just want to record, edit, and publish the episode and get on with my life. But I have to say, looking at her show notes, I'm inspired to do better. Look, there it is, the transformation that we want for all of our listeners. Sorry, Mel, this probably isn't the transformation that you had in mind, but I will tell you, by the time I get around to writing my show notes, I'm usually like, F it! And I do the absolute bare minimum. So I'm making a promise right here, right now, to do better. I see so many podcasters that don't take advantage of this real estate. You can drop links in there so that they can connect with you on social media. You can also use it as a way to drive listeners back to your website. So I'm going to share with you the 4 things that I absolutely loved about these Mel Robbins show notes. And number 4 is my favorite, so make sure you stick around to hear that one. It's a biggie. Within the episode description, so this is just the first few sentences about what the episode is actually about, we get a promise of transformation if we listen to this episode. I love transformation. I want to be a better human. I want to write better show notes. Here's the caveat. If you are making a promise about transformation or anything else, you better deliver on that promise in the episode. You want to build trust with your audience. And delivering on promises is one way we can build trust. We also get timestamps with highlights from the episode, and pay attention to how the descriptions are written for what is happening at each timestamp. I'm not going to tell you. Go look for yourself. I hope that using this episode as an example and talking about how much I love it actually gets her some more downloads. Not that she needs my help. And the third thing that really jumped out at me was she's using this description in both the YouTube video and the podcast, almost like just a little mini show notes or mini description. She's got a link to take you back to the website so you can get the full episode show notes along with links to the resources and articles that she cites. Are you citing your resources when you mention someone else's work in your episode? You should be. Okay, and here's number 4, my absolute favorite. This is brilliant. This is how you get someone to share your podcast without asking them to share your podcast. So she includes a PS, and it reads, if you're frustrated with somebody in your life who keeps calling it quits, let me do the honors and deliver the ass-kicking for you. Come on, that is brilliant. I don't hear an ask in that. What I hear is, let me help you. All right, friends, let's recap this masterclass from Mel Robbins and her team. Number 1, the first thing you need to do is figure out your why if you haven't done that already. Number 2, who? Who should you study? Pick someone that you admire, that their work really resonates with you. Who's somebody that's doing that thing that you want to do? And then study how. How are they creating the content? How are they using their platform? How are they branding it? Where are they sharing it? What are they repurposing? How are they engaging with their audience? Dive in, make notes, analyze it, and implement what you're learning. I want to know who you are studying as your role model or influence in the way that you want to create and show up in the world. Leave it in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or DM me on Instagram at BrassyBroadJen. That's where I'm usually hanging out on social media. And if you're tired of hearing one of your friends complain about how their podcast download numbers suck, or they aren't getting any traction with their YouTube channel or their podcast, send them this episode. Now you've done something to help, and the rest is up to them. And if you're thinking about starting your own podcast, or maybe you're stuck with something on your current podcast, book a consulting session with me. I'll have a link in the show notes and the description. Thanks for tuning in. Now get out in the world and do some good.